Welcome to this deep dive. Today we have honestly, a fascinating stack of clinical literature, research papers, and case studies.
Yeah.
And it's all focused on integrated care for adolescent substance use and mental health.
Yeah, it's a really incredible batch of sources.
It really is. And our mission for you today is, well, it's simple but massive. We are going to completely flip the script on how we understand teenage behavior.
We really have to.
Right. We'll unpack why our default reactions are usually just, dead wrong. And then we're going to look at how a specific program in Georgia, it's called MentalSpace School, how they are taking this new research and basically revolutionizing how schools actually operate.
Yeah, it really is a total paradigm shift. And I mean, it requires us to immediately abandon a lot of our deep-seated assumptions.
Right, because usually when we talk about a teenager getting caught with substances, whether that's, alcohol, vaping, or maybe something harder, there is this incredibly predictable script that we all follow.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost reflexive.
Right. We catch them and we immediately frame it as a disciplinary issue, like a character flaw.
A sign of rebellion.
Exactly. Or just a kid falling in with the wrong crowd and, succumbing to peer pressure.
Yeah, the immediate adult instinct is just to crack down. We punish the behavior, we restrict their privileges, we search their room.
We ground them.
Right, we ground them, and we just assume that the substance use itself is the entirety of the problem. We treat the substance use as the disease.
But the sources we're looking at today argue that we have this entirely backwards.
Completely backwards.
Yeah. So if you are a parent trying to navigate these years, or an educator on the front lines, or really just someone fascinated by human psychology, you have to hear this.
Definitely.
Because the clinical data shows us that the majority of teenagers who develop substance use issues, they aren't just rebelling for the thrill of it.
Not at all. And, the language we use to describe this matters immensely. When we look at the clinical data, it shows that these teenagers are actually coping with an underlying, completely untreated mental health condition.
Wow.
Yeah, we're talking about severe anxiety, depression, maybe undiagnosed ADHD, trauma, or just massive family stress.
Okay, I want to make sure I am fully wrapping my head around this, because I feel like this is the core of the whole shift.
It really is.
The substance use is just the visible symptom of an invisible mental health condition.
Exactly.
But what about peer pressure? Because, we always hear about the dangers of peer pressure, but the research you highlighted suggests peer pressure alone isn't the strongest predictor of substance use. How does that actually work?
Well, it's a great distinction to make. Peer pressure might be the vehicle, right? It might be the environment where the substance is first introduced, like at party or behind the bleachers.
Sure.
But it's the untreated mental health condition underneath that makes the teenagers susceptible to making it a habit.
Oh, I see.
Let's imagine a hypothetical 15-year-old. We'll call her Sarah.
Okay, Sarah.
So Sarah tries vaping because her friends are doing it. That's peer pressure.
Right.
But if Sarah has undiagnosed crushing anxiety, that nicotine suddenly provides a chemical relief she has literally never felt before.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So the substance quickly becomes a deeply flawed, incredibly dangerous coping mechanism.
She's self-medicating.
Exactly. It is self-medication for pain or chaos that she simply does not have the emotional vocabulary to articulate yet.
That makes so much sense. It's like looking at a blaring check engine light on your car's dashboard.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Getting mad at the light, or, trying to smash the bulb with a hammer, it doesn't fix the engine at all.
Not even a little bit.
The substance use is just the dashboard light. And our default reaction is to punish the bulb while the engine is literally tearing itself apart.
That is the perfect way to visualize it. Because when we punish the dashboard light, when we, ground Sarah for a month and scream at her, we are completely ignoring the actual friction in the engine.
We're ignoring the anxiety.
Right. We are ignoring the anxiety. And because we ignore it, the underlying condition only gets worse.
Which just drives more substance use.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle, and it's born out of a fundamental misunderstanding of the mechanism of addiction.
Okay, so since we've established that the substance use is really just the visible warning light, how do we actually spot that light flickering before the engine completely breaks down? Like, what should we be looking for?
Well, the clinical literature outlines 3 major visible signs to watch for.
Okay.
First, sudden changes in friend groups.
Sudden changes.
Yeah. Not a gradual, natural drift apart, which is normal, but an abrupt, total replacement of who they spend their time with.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Second, a noticeable decline in school performance, attendance, or just their general motivation toward things they used to care about.
So if Sarah loved soccer and suddenly quits and won't go to practice, That's a red flag.
Exactly. That's a major red flag.
And the third?
Secretive behavior paired with noticeable physical changes.
What kind of physical changes?
This could be severe sleep disruption, massive shifts in energy levels, or drastic changes in their physical appearance or unexplained weight changes.
Okay.
The sources also point to other critical red flags, like sudden withdrawal from the family and mood swings that go significantly beyond the typical adolescent range.
Okay, hold on. I have to push back here a little bit on behalf of anyone listening who has ever lived with a teenager.
Sure, go for it.
Because mood swings beyond the typical adolescent range.
Yeah.
I mean, how does a parent or teacher actually measure that?
It's tough.
Right. Being moody, slamming doors, pulling away from your parents, that is practically the dictionary definition of being a teenager.
It really is.
So how do you spot the line where typical teenage angst crosses into, like, a clinical cry for help?
That is probably the most common question clinicians get, and it is incredibly hard for adults to navigate.
I bet.
The key differentiator here is the baseline and the duration.
Okay, baseline and duration.
Right. Typical teenage angst is transient. So Sarah might be slam door angry about a curfew on Tuesday, but she's laughing at a TikTok video with you on Wednesday.
Right, the weather changes quickly.
Exactly. But when we talk about clinical mood swings, we are looking at a sustained, pervasive shift in their baseline.
Sustained.
Yeah, it is an intensity that impairs their daily functioning.
Oh, I see.
If their withdrawal means they are completely isolated in their room for weeks, or if the mood swing prevents them from attending school, doing homework, or just participating in life for extended periods, that has crossed the line.
It's impairing them.
Right. It's no longer just developmental independence seeking, It's a clinical warning sign.
That distinction is incredibly helpful. It's about the disruption to their actual ability to function. But let's talk about the adult reaction. You mentioned earlier that our instinct is to punish.
Yes.
The sources are incredibly explicit about why that's the absolute wrong move for providers and school staff. But I want to know the mechanics of why it fails.
The research is definitive on this. Punishment-based responses are profoundly counterproductive because they destroy psychological safety.
Psychological safety, okay.
Yeah. When an adult reacts to that check engine light with anger or suspension or harsh punitive measures, it doesn't teach the kid a lesson.
Right.
It teaches them to hide. It drives the behavior underground.
Wow.
The teenager learns that it is not safe to share their struggles, which isolates them further with the very anxiety or trauma that's driving the use in the first place.
So we are essentially making the underlying problem worse by attacking the symptom.
Exactly. We're adding fuel to the fire.
What is the better approach then? If a teacher or a parent sees these signs in Sarah, what do they actually say to her?
Well, the sources emphasize 3 core principles: curiosity, compassion, and connection.
Curiosity, compassion, connection.
Right. Instead of leading with an accusation like, "Are you doing drugs?" you lead with curiosity. You might say, "Sarah, I've noticed you haven't been yourself lately, and you seem really exhausted. What's going on?"
You're inviting them to talk about the engine, not the dashboard light.
Precisely. And crucially, this compassionate approach must be paired with a clinical referral.
Okay, so getting a professional involved.
Yes. A diagnosis must be made by a licensed clinician, not a well-meaning adult who's just guessing at the problem.
Right, because we aren't mechanics.
Exactly. The data clearly proves that earlier intervention using this clinical, curious approach significantly improves the long-term trajectory for the adolescent.
So curiosity instead of condemnation. We spot the dashboard light, we bring in a mechanic, in this case a licensed clinician, to look at the engine.
Perfect summary.
That brings us to the treatment itself. The sources talk extensively about the integrated care solution. Why is it so critical that we treat both the substance use and the mental health issue simultaneously?
Because if you treat only one, you are basically engineering a failure.
Really?
Yeah. Evidence-based care requires addressing both the substance use and the underlying clinical drivers. Let's go back to Sarah.
Okay.
If you send her to a rehab program that only focuses on stopping the vaping.
Just putting out the one fire.
Right. But you never address the crushing anxiety that made her start vaping in the first place, she will almost certainly relapse.
Because you took away her coping mechanism without giving her a new way to survive the anxiety. The fire is still burning.
Exactly. The pain driving and the need for the substance is still there, screaming for relief.
Wow.
To actually fix this, the clinical literature highlights 4 specific evidence-based modalities that must be utilized in tandem.
Okay, let's walk through how they actually work.
The first is ACRA, which stands for Adolescent Community Reinforcement Approach.
What does that actually look like in practice?
ACRA is essentially physical therapy, but for social and coping muscles.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's about building the practical skills a teenager needs to cope with their environment without relying on substances. It systematically replaces the negative coping tool with positive, community-based reinforcement.
Okay, so give me an example for Sarah.
So for Sarah, instead of just saying, don't vape, an ACRA approach might help her discover, say, a music program, or a part-time job, or a new hobby that provides a natural dopamine hit.
Right.
And it surrounds her with peers who reinforce her sobriety. It actively builds a life where it's easier to stay sober than to use.
I love that. But wait, teaching her coping skills and finding her a music group, I mean, that won't really matter if she goes home at 5 p.m. to a highly chaotic, stressful household.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
It would be like cleaning a fish and then dropping it right back into a toxic tank.
Yeah.
And that is exactly why the second modality is family-based therapy.
Ah, okay.
This operates on the foundational principle that adolescents do not exist in isolation. They are part of an ecosystem.
Right, the family unit.
Exactly. If you treat the teenager for an hour a week, but send them back into a dysfunctional family dynamic without getting the parents the tools to communicate differently, well, the treatment won't hold.
Because the environment hasn't changed.
Right. You have to treat the whole ecosystem.
Okay, so we are building social skills with ACRA. We are treating the home environment with family-based therapy. What's the third piece?
The third is CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, this works on the internal machinery. CBT helps the adolescent identify and rewire the negative thought patterns that lead to destructive behaviors.
So it changes how they think.
Exactly. It intercepts the process. So if Sarah's internal monologue is, I failed this math test, I'm worthless, I can't handle this, CBT teaches her to catch that exact thought, challenge it, and change the behavior that usually follows it.
Okay, but what if she doesn't want to intercept the thought?
That happens a lot.
Right. What if she's sitting in the therapist chair with her arms crossed, totally ambivalent about changing anything? We all know teenagers can dig their heels in.
Oh, absolutely. And that is exactly why the fourth modality is so brilliant. It's called motivational interviewing.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting to me.
It's great, right?
I was reading the notes on motivational interviewing, and it struck me as basically psychological judo for teenagers.
That's a great way to put it.
Because instead of telling them what to do, which we know will just make a teenager rebel harder,
Yeah.
you somehow help them argue themselves into wanting to change. I mean, how does a therapist actually pull that off?
Psychological judo is the perfect analogy. You know, adolescents are at a developmental stage where autonomy is their primary drive.
Oh, definitely.
If an adult says you need to stop doing this, their biological instinct is to resist.
Of course.
So motivational interviewing flips that dynamic completely. The clinician refuses to lecture.
No lecturing.
None. Instead, they asked highly strategic, open-ended questions that gently guide the adolescent to explore their own goals, their own values, and, the discrepancies between those values and their current behavior.
So instead of a lecture like, Sarah, your vaping is ruining your grades and your health, what does a therapist say?
The therapist might ask something like, Sarah, you mentioned you really want to make the varsity soccer team this year. How do you feel your vaping fits into that goal?
Oh, wow. That puts the ball entirely in her court.
Exactly. You use their own momentum against the destructive behavior.
Right.
When the teenager realizes the behavior is sabotaging what they want, the motivation to change comes from within. The resistance drops because they aren't fighting the adult anymore.
They are working toward their own goals.
Right.
It is incredibly clever. So we know the clinical theories. We understand the check engine light metaphor, and we see how these evidence-based modalities like ACRA, CBT, family-based therapy, and our psychological judo all fit together. But this brings us to a massive logistical hurdle. How do we actually deliver this complex dual treatment care to kids in the environment where they spend the vast majority of their waking hours at school?
Yeah, that is the ultimate systemic challenge.
Right.
And this is where the source material points us to a real-world systemic solution currently operating in Georgia. It's called MentalSpace School.
Let's dive into that, because reading about a theoretical framework is one thing, but seeing it applied at scale is another.
Totally different.
How does mental space school actually work inside these districts? Does a kid just like walk down the hall to a clinic?
Actually, yeah. Mental Space School operates directly inside Georgia school districts to provide comprehensive K through 12 mental health support.
Wow.
They integrate completely into the school's ecosystem. They provide dedicated therapist teams for each individual school.
Each school gets a team.
Yes. And this covers everything from crisis intervention and suicide or violence prevention to staff wellness programs and the family counseling we discussed earlier.
That's huge.
And for the student, it's designed to be seamless. They might step into a private, dedicated room at school for a session without the stigma of leaving campus to go to a shrink's office.
And the providers themselves, are they schooling counselors or specialized therapists?
They are all fully licensed clinicians.
Okay.
Furthermore, the program emphasizes that these therapists are diverse and culturally competent.
That seems really important.
It's a vital detail. If you are trying to build trust with a diverse student body, the teenager needs to feel understood culturally to engage in something as vulnerable as therapy.
Okay, I have to highlight a detail here from the sources that honestly stopped me in my tracks.
Which one?
They offer same-day teletherapy.
Oh, yeah.
Now, for anyone listening who has ever tried to get a teenager or anyone really into therapy, wait lists can be agonizing.
They are terrible.
You finally make the brave choice to ask for help, and the medical system tells you to wait until November. Getting same-day access right inside the school environment sounds like a total game changer.
It absolutely changes the landscape of intervention. Think about the nature of a crisis, right?
Right.
When a teenager is spiraling, or when a teacher spots that check engine light flickering wildly, you cannot afford a 6-month wait.
No, the engine will break.
Exactly. Same-day access means the intervention happens at the moment of highest leverage, right when the student is most receptive or most in need.
But implementing this kind of massive systemic support usually runs into two brick walls: administrative red tape and money.
Oh, always.
If I'm a school administrator listening to this, I'm immediately sweating about privacy laws and state mandates. How does Mental Space School handle the compliance side of things?
This is a critical point. Mental Space School provides full compliance support for HIPAA and FERPA, ensuring that both medical records and educational privacy are perfectly protected.
Okay, that's a relief.
But there is a massive urgency here regarding state law that we have to talk about. They provide turnkey support for HB 268 compliance.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. What exactly is HB 268 and why is it urgent?
HB 268 is a Georgia state mandate requiring schools to have specific, actionable, and comprehensive mental health and crisis intervention protocols in place.
So it's not a suggestion.
No, it's no longer just a recommendation. It's a legal requirement to ensure schools are equipped to handle these exact types of student crises safely and effectively.
And what is the timeline for schools to get this done?
The deadline for Georgia schools to comply with HB 268 is July 2026.
Wait, July 2026?
Yeah.
But given that it is currently May 2026, that deadline is essentially right now.
Yes. They have basically 2 months. Districts are scrambling to figure out how to build these massive mental health infrastructures from scratch.
It's terrifying for an administrator.
Exactly. But Mental Space School essentially drops in as a fully formed, compliant solution to meet that mandate before the upcoming school year.
Wow, 2 months. That is incredibly urgent.
Right.
So they handle the legal and compliance side, but let's talk about the second brick wall: access and cost.
Right.
Therapy is notoriously expensive. We're talking hundreds of dollars an hour sometimes. How on earth are families affording this?
This might be the most impactful part of their entire model. Mental Space School actively breaks down the financial barriers to pair. For families on Medicaid, the out-of-pocket cost is exactly $0.
$0.
$0.
That is massive for accessibility.
It is life-changing. And for those who aren't on Medicaid, they accept virtually all major commercial insurance plans.
Okay.
So instead of a family having to navigate out-of-network super bills, they can just use their existing coverage.
Right.
By doing this, they ensure that the vast majority of the student population can access these top-tier licensed clinicians without bankrupting their families.
So we have immediate access, integrated dual care, diverse clinicians, and it's heavily subsidized or fully covered by insurance.
Yep.
The theory sounds flawless.
Mm-hmm.
What do the actual outcomes look like? Does bringing this level of integrated care into the schools actually move the needle?
The outcomes they're reporting are honestly stunning. We are talking about an 89% improved attendance rate among the students they treat.
Wait, 89%. That's incredible.
It's massive.
But let me ask you about the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
How does sitting in a therapy room, fixing a mental health issue, suddenly make a kid show up for first period biology?
Because for many of these students, the school environment itself or the social dynamics within it was the trigger for their anxiety or their trauma.
Oh, of course.
When their anxiety was untreated, their only coping mechanism was avoidance, skipping school entirely, or using substances to numb out.
Right, flight response.
Exactly. But when you use CBT to rewire those thoughts and ACRA to build their coping skills, the school is no longer a threat. You fix the trigger and they come back to the classroom.
That makes perfect sense. What else are they seeing?
They report a 92% reduction in anxiety symptoms across the board.
Wow.
And from the family ecosystem side of things, they boast an 85% family satisfaction rate.
That's huge.
Yeah, when you treat the whole picture, the mental health driver, the substance use symptom, and you equip the family with tools, the entire system stabilizes.
For any administrators, educators, or parents in Georgia who are hearing this and realizing this is exactly what their district needs to meet that July deadline, how do they actually get in touch with MentalSpace School?
The contact details from our sources are very straightforward. Administrators and school leaders can reach them through their website at mentalspaceschool.com.
Okay, mentalspaceschool.com.
Right? Or they can email their team directly at mentalspaceschool@shittherapy.com to start the conversation.
Let's bring this all together. We started this deep dive by challenging a deeply ingrained assumption.
Yes.
The idea that adolescent substance use is just bad behavior, a character flaw, or simply a kid giving in to peer pressure.
And what the clinical evidence clearly shows us is that we have to fundamentally shift our perspective.
Right.
Substance use is an alarm bell. It is the visible symptom of invisible conditions like anxiety, depression, or trauma.
The dashboard light.
The dashboard light. We have to move away from our default setting of punishment, which only drives the behavior underground, and instead approach these adolescents with curiosity and compassion.
We have to stop smashing the check engine light and actually look under the hood.
Exactly.
And the only evidence-based path forward is integrated care utilizing things like motivational interviewing and family-based therapy to treat both the addiction and the mental health driver simultaneously.
That's the only way.
Programs like MentalSpace School are proving that when you remove the barriers to access and put this care directly into the school environment, the outcomes are literally life-changing.
It really is a complete reimagining of how we support the next generation. It gives me a lot of hope to know that these systems are actually being built and deployed right now.
It is incredibly hopeful, but I know you always like to look at the macro level. When we connect all of this to the bigger picture, where does that leave us?
Well, I'll leave you, the listener, with this thought to mull over long after we sign off today. If we acknowledge that adolescent substance use is essentially a desperate coping mechanism for untreated anxiety, trauma, and stress, what does that tell us about the modern high-pressure environments we've designed for our youth? Are we just treating the symptoms of a world that is inherently overwhelming to teenagers?